Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a brand new video over here on the channel by the name of LeaIsChill. Today I wanted to try out something a little bit different from usual. We previously did a tier list of the Tokyo Ghoul characters in the past, and I liked the concept, but naturally, if you know me, you'll know that I play a lot of gacha games, and so over the years we've had quite a few that come into our lives, are very interesting, are very fun to play, have some pretty interesting characters, and some that end up going away over time. And so I've seen a shit ton of games that I've played personally that just kind of went away over time. So today what I wanted to do is celebrate those games that have went and kind of talk about them a little bit, as well as the things that made them struggle and made them close down in the first place. Because naturally, not every game can be a Fate Go or a Dokkan. Some games reach that level and come back down. For example, the first one we're actually doing today is going to be one that's closing down in February of 2021. So it isn't closed down just yet, but it is happening. So that's a pretty natural thing that does happen over time. So let's go ahead and get into it, and we'll start off with a very obvious pick here by the name of Ultimate Ninja Blazing. Now, Naruto Ultimate Ninja Blazing is a game that has been around for a long time. This right here is the second anniversary icon, but we're all the way up to 4-year anniversary and would have been 5th year as of this summer. So it's been a game that's been around for a long time, and it's actually been very popular, especially on YouTube, around the 2nd year anniversary, and then kind of tapered off over time. And a lot of that came from the need for dupes, the rates, the different systems they had. But honestly, as a foundation, I think that Ultimate Ninja Blazing was a really fun game. They didn't steal. They took cutscenes from Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm and used them for the animations for the actual characters in this game. And so it does put a little bit of a damper on using ultimates because it's just kind of reused from the PS4 game. But there is quite a bit of strategy that goes into the certain systems they had in PvP. They had a really good gacha where typically you'd be pulling on pretty big banners that were like 9-step step-ups, and eventually you get them guaranteed at the final step. But it did become a very heavily whale game because people were very focused on getting every dupe to be able to maximize as much as they could. And honestly, if I were to take a look at everything Blazing has been up to this point, I think it's on the better side of the games that we're actually looking at today. So I would put it right around, I would say, here. Because it is a dupe heavy system, I'm not going to put it all the way over on the good gacha side. I'd put it a little bit higher in terms of fun gameplay because it's a game that the depth came heavily from placement on the field of gameplay. It came down to knowing abilities and knowing what characters had dodge and not. So it came down to a lot of memorization and understanding everything about the game, which is very fun. Next on up, we're gonna be looking at a Tokyo Ghoul game. So this is a Tokyo Ghoul game that came out a little bit earlier than all the other ones, and was mostly predominantly around between 2015 to late 2016 or so. Let me actually look up, when did it come out properly? Tokyo Ghoul Carnival came out February 9th, 2015 and closed April 13th, 2017. And so this game was around for about 2 years, and it was a very strange type of game. If you know the Jojo Stardust Shooters game, which is you shoot pogs across an arena, if you know Monster Strike, for example, those are all very similar to how this game played. It did have elements around it that were very interesting. You were able to bounce off of the walls to get damage bonuses, and they would do little poses. But quite a few characters in the game didn't even have models and were turned into just red and blue silhouettes, which wasn't as great for it. and they only ended up getting some color units as of like their first year anniversary or a little bit later. Eventually they got some re-characters, they got some pretty interesting pieces. They have quite a few units they never actually got to because the shutdown was so early for it. But it was one of the Tokyo Ghoul games that got the most room to breathe in terms of characters they wanted to add to the game. So like they had a reindeer Shachi and stuff like that, which was very fancy. But the gacha wasn't so great. It was like a very, very low percent for SSRs. The gameplay was enjoyable, but it became a lot of stacking multipliers by itself. And so the game's main troubles was the fact that the gacha took a lot of investment to be able to get there. And a lot of the time, beyond that character, you also needed good equipment. You also needed good bonuses. You needed to know how the game worked. And so I'm going to put it on the side of a little bit fun gameplay, but definitely a pretty poor gacha in terms of rates and also like collection and stuff. Because they also had a separate equipment gacha that was inside it. So enjoyable, just okay. But next on up, what we're going to talk about, this next category is actually split into two different ones. So if you guys know about My Hero Smash Tap and My Hero Smash Rising, they were two different technical versions of the same game. So originally, Smash Tap came out, and it was like a BBS style game where you had 2 attack buttons, and it was mostly autoplay. So the game would kind of go for you. You could play it, but it was very clunky. It was a portrait style game, and so you would be tapping, and then you'd use your ultimates to be able to beat the bosses. But it had character models you would play with. Typically, you'd be pulling for the exact character, and so a lot of the time, you were very reliant on pulling at least a copy of that character in the banner to be able to get the crazy amounts of damage off. So the game in its original form was actually really enjoyable. The characters they released were very interesting. They had like a half fire, half ice Todoroki when he first dropped inside the anime. They had United States of Smash All Might, which was really cool. He had like a blocking mechanic as well. And honestly, I would say like, despite the fact I think the gacha definitely could have been a lot better, just because the rates were pretty poor, and also like you were very reliant on trying to use the gems you were able to farm unless you were a whale. I would put it right around like here. Honestly, the gameplay was a little bit more enjoyable than Blazing, but I put it around that section. It had really fun gameplay for what it was. It was very grind heavy, so like you did want to run like high luck units, which was getting the character duped out all the way to be able to grind every event that came out. And so the game was very much reliant on having a luck lead and then having a back row that would be your main DPS. So the flow of the game was a little bit strange, but still very enjoyable. You can also get your regular units maxed out too, so like it was still worth it. And then they had a several month-long maintenance where they switched the game from that style of gameplay to this style, which is Smash Rising. Smash Rising was a very, very different game. Every one of the units that you previously pulled for, that you would originally go for the gacha for, were then converted into equipable cards you could put on your base units. And so the gacha was no longer reliant on the units you were going to play. So you always had a Midoriya, you always had a Todoroki and a Bakugo, you always had an All Might. And those were always units you would always have on hand. And then you'd be putting the cards you pull from the gacha on these characters to make them more powerful, give them higher stats, get them able to grind out the events that you want them to do. And so the game became a lot more of kind of watching your characters play through the game for you. And also every character you had pulled for before that you had went super, super hard for originally in the gacha now was delegated to only an equipable to every unit inside the game, which is a horrible revamp. There is no situation ever that you should be turning your game from a character collector to an equipment collector in the middle of it releasing. Now, the gameplay actually went down quite a bit because inside Smash Rising, it became a lot more heavily watching your characters do things and hitting the button when it was time to, which is similar, but different enough where it became a lot less enjoyable to watch even. So I'd honestly put Smash Rising as my first bottom left pick, honestly. With both gameplay that was less enjoyable than the original version, and a gacha that just didn't make it in terms of any kind of interesting style. It just didn't work. And so the second version of the game lost me entirely as a player until it finally shut down very recently, and we had a new My Hero game announced coming up very soon. So it do be like that, don't it? Next on up that I wanted to talk about a little bit is actually this little Magia Records game. So this is, how do I describe it? So Madoka Magica is an anime that came out a while ago that's a very dark magical girl style show, and had a very, very specific amount of cast. They had 4 main girls, I think maybe 5. Yeah, 5. 4 if you don't count the ones with no head. That's bad. But this game turned that into a gacha game and instead had a lot of OC creations in terms of original versions of different magical girls. Still pretty cool. They had some really cool designs inside it, but I found the gameplay to be a little bit less interesting than I would have hoped out of a game like this. And so very soon after it released, there was actually a pretty poor reception in the global market. And from what I saw, not a lot of people that I was talking to even gave it a try beyond the first hour. I gave it a little bit to try and see if I would enjoy it. I think it had a really good gacha system. It was pretty much just what you expect with trying to pull a unit. The gameplay just really didn't hit for me. And I think that's a lot of the reason. It's just when you're trying to sell fresh characters that aren't really a part of the series you're actually running, you really need to make those characters interesting and also make the gameplay interesting enough where people will continue to play it. And so that's also why I think that See No Alice is having such trouble in the global market right now, just because it has a really good foundation, it has a cool gacha, but the flow of trying to keep players, as well as the gameplay mostly being text heavy and then a little bit of gameplay, has turned a lot of people off of it. So I don't think that See No Alice is gonna end up being around for too much longer from what I'm seeing. But it'll really depend on what the next couple of years are like for that game, right? But it's very similar to this, I would say. See No Alice has this kind of issue to it. So it's interesting. Next on up, I actually don't have an icon for one of the things I wanted to add to this list. Give me one moment, I'm gonna quickly add something. Okay, so I went ahead and added a new icon to this because I actually remembered one more game that closed last year that I personally was really, really sad about. So I wanted to talk about it here a little bit since there's no better chance to. So here is Jojo Diamond Records. It was a very interesting gacha game that kind of went through a similar transition as Smash Tap to Smash Rising, where it went from more of a run around beat 'em up style game to a turn-based RPG style game. And so every unit people had used up to that point that was kind of meta, that was created to be used inside this current system that was a 3D beat 'em up, was then converted into a turn-based system and completely rebalanced for this new combat style. And within a couple of months of that, the game started to see a major loss in retention. So around the anniversary, when they were going to be leaving, they dropped Part 5's main protagonist and antagonist in Golden Experience Requiem, which is the endgame version of the Part 5 protagonist, and Diavolo, which is the endgame Part 5 protagonist or antagonist that's super scary. And so both of them had ridiculous mechanics for this new turn-based system that made it like pretty unbalanced for a little bit. And then not 1 month after Diavolo drops, they then close the game down in order to just kind of have one last rush of money come in. And then they're like, okay, we can't sustain that. We gotta go now. Thanks though, we appreciate it. And it was honestly very sad. I think a lot of people enjoyed the 3D beat 'em up system a lot more because it was a little bit more interesting in terms of how they had to balance it. I remember I've heard a lot of things about Shigechi being broken back in the day. And then when things changed, like Diavolo and Giorno pretty much broke the meta inside of it. I did really enjoy what I tried of it, both in the original version, which is a 3D beat 'em up version, and the like actual turn-based system. I think that the turn-based system, if it was fleshed out from the beginning, could have been really interesting, but the sudden change in genre halfway through the span of your life of your game doesn't work and will not retain an audience. And that's the big trouble, because eventually these gacha game creators are writing themselves into a corner with their mechanics they have as a base and don't know where to go from there. And when you do that, you try and revamp it, and that revamp can sometimes just ruin it entirely for a lot of people. So I'm actually going to put this on the side of, see, when I think about the finale of the game and everything, I would put it on the side of a bad gacha because it just tried to milk people of the money they had left before it closed down. So I'm going to put it right around here. I think it has fun gameplay. It had a good gacha in terms of what it gave to you, as well as like rates and how the step-ups work and everything. So I will say that. But I definitely think they had a lot of flaws on the table as well. And yeah. Next on up, we're going to take a look. Unless I can do any of these. You know what? Let's just have a cooldown one. Hey, here's Tales of the Link. Do you know what this game is? This was the Tales game that had almost constantly one new unit every single couple of weeks. And so there were swimsuit units of fucking Asbel from that series and all kinds of stuff. Because Tales of is such an ever-spanning series, they were able to pull units from literally any series they wanted to. That is Tales. So like Zillia 2, Abyss, anything like that. And they could just constantly pump out these units because all they needed was a little artwork and a tiny little drawing of a character that fits in a 6x6 grid. And so a lot of it was a combo building system, which was not too great. Honestly, this game had some very poor gameplay. However, as a massive Tales fan, I was really a fan of the fact that there was a lot of representation from the different Tales games I'd played in the past. And so honestly, I'm going to give it a really, really good gacha. I think that consistent releases as well as new content in that regard is really good. The gameplay just kind of ended up lacking after a while, and after about like 4 or 5 years of service, it just eventually tapered off in its own ways. Okay. Hey, Ruby Amity Arena is a Ruby-based tower defense gacha game that released last year, and it was poor. Not only was the gacha not too enjoyable, kind of hard to pull the units you wanted, and didn't really seem to balance out the characters in a good way, the gameplay was also a very counterintuitive, like top-down tower defense game that eventually, I want to say after about 3 or 4 hours, just kind of felt very samey. And no matter what level you did, it felt like you were playing to the same formula. This game lasted about a year and then shut right down. I would say it had worse gameplay than Smash Rising for sure. I'd probably put Smash Rising over here, if anything. It had a bad gacha actually, especially bad gacha, but like less bad gameplay. So that's how I would put it right there. So, bounced out a little bit. I don't think Amity Arena was a very good game. and it just seemed like a cash grab on Ruby because it's up to fucking season 19 and a half now or something. But you know how it goes. Next up, actually I have two Tales of Link inside here. We can ignore this one. Just ignore that. They're the same thing. Boop. Here, let's do Black Clover next, and then we'll talk about some other ones. So Black Clover Phantom Nights was a mostly autoplay style RPG game from Bandai that released with a very, very poor foundation. A lot of the gameplay was centered around, you have a core unit of 5 characters and a set style of 2 formations. Your only capability in battle is to hit the ultimate button and to switch formations between the 2 you have selected. And so a lot of what you're doing is trying to build your team up to the point where they can destroy every piece of content without any input from you whatsoever. And this made it very, very unenjoyable. This, on top of the fact that it was one of the most free-to-play friendly games out there, and also eventually, most people that played this game religiously in the daily had hundreds of thousands of currency ready for any unit that dropped, and was also able to kind of get enough of the Rainbow Phantom sheets where most characters they would pull, they could probably get to 7-star pretty reliably when they first came out. And so the game, because it became so free-to-play friendly, also kind of shot itself in the foot because people didn't have to spend on the gacha as much. And so eventually, the only people that played the game that were remaining were the ones that were logging in to do their dailies every day. And those people were the ones that weren't going to spend on the game. So it kind of locked itself in a loop where the gameplay lost a lot of people that weren't dedicated fans, and the dedicated fans were dedicated enough to keep on doing the stuff reliably and didn't have to spend money. So both sides of the equation they ended up losing out on, and honestly, I think they got a shit ton better with the art, because I think that the ReInvoke artist moved over to this Black Clover game because the art actually improved a shit ton after ReInvoke died. Because the 7-stars were like brand new styles of like cool shading and neat stuff, but the gameplay just remained the same, and autoplay gameplay like that doesn't last very long, unfortunately. So I would put it overwhelmingly in the boring gameplay category. But I would say that its gacha was on the better side because it was free-to-play friendly, and because eventually everyone could get pretty much every unit as long as they worked for it, which is a sign of a good gacha, at least to me. Same thing with Blazing. I would say Blazing eventually, you'll probably get a copy of every unit, just maybe off banner or on the next one if you're going for Blazing Fest and stuff like that. I know a lot of the time, if I was trying to chase a certain unit, I would end up getting copies of the last banner unit I didn't go for. So, it's good stuff. So, we got about 2 more really big contenders on the list. So I want to quickly rapid fire through some ones that people may not know about. So, this one and this one, for very different reasons. So this one, first of all, that I'm putting right in the middle, is World Trigger Smash Borders. This is a tower defense style game where, you know how in Farmville, you have like a base of operations and you like kind of set up like your tomatoes over there and your potatoes over there, and you slowly build up like a full-scale farm? What if that farm was instead what you use to fight your battles? And so you need to make a full-scale town that's able to defend against an alien invasion from the World Trigger series. So it's a lot of like Treon soldiers that you have to fight with like the bounce pad you made that goes over to the gunner over here that fires them over this way, that goes to combo to your other character that bounces them back that way. And so the game was focused around bouncing enemies off of walls and trying to get them to rebound off of as many different enemies and like friendlies as possible to get as much damage as possible. And the combo style system ended up turning out really, really fun. Unfortunately, the game suffered a lot from World Trigger not being consistent with its manga because the mangaka unfortunately had an incident where they had a bad backplate, I believe, for a long period of time, and the manga just completely disappeared for a while. But Smash Borders, it had a really fun gacha system. It had a really good gacha animation, actually, where it would kind of rainbow up for the 7 stars as well. And it had some very, very cool units. If you are a World Trigger fan, this was definitely the game to play back in the day. I actually have a couple of videos on the channel about it, because I actually really enjoyed it right before it closed down. And I would honestly put it like high up here. It's probably one of the most fun and best gachas I played. The issue is the franchise it was from, the popularity, and also eventually you hit a skill cap so high that if you didn't have the perfect base, you'd be dead. And there was kind of cheat bases to make. So very cool. Here we have Shonen Jump Ore Collection. Now, this is a game that went through a similar style change to Smash Rising and Diamond Records. But this one did it in a very, very weird way. So originally it was a portrait style game where you would be collecting manga characters. It was one of the only games that had Reborn, Katsuki Hitman Reborn inside it. It went all the way to part 5 in Jojo. It had a shit ton of like late Naruto stuff before it was even available in the other stuff. It was a really, really cool game. And then it shut down for a couple of months and came back in what was a portrait style game, turned into a landscape game that was then a turn-based RPG, where you didn't really keep any of the characters you had previously, which was a big red flag, first of all. But after this revamp, they also added characters like, Tanjiro from Demon Slayer, and fucking crazy Gokus and Luffy's and stuff. So they started to really push home like 3D models, and it was one of the only games you can get Demon Slayer characters. And then it died embarrassingly because the gameplay was 10 times more boring, and the gacha was even less forgiving, and you needed a shit ton of dupes to max out characters, and so it went right down here. The original version of Ore Collection, honestly, would probably go somewhere around here. The gacha wasn't super great, but like the gameplay was more enjoyable. It had more like style to it. It does get old though. Maybe it would probably stay in the boring gameplay side though. It really depends on how much you enjoy timing-based things and building up combos. Neither were very good though. And yeah, got 3 more here. I'm saving the best for last, so let's go into Dragon Ball Buchigiri Match. Now, this isn't actually a proper mobile gacha game, because this game actually never came out for mobile. This was a game you had to play on browser on your phone most of the time, but it was a Dragon Ball Z gacha game that quite a few people actually tried out and played. And honestly, the art was really, really fantastic. I feel like a lot of the time while I played Buchigiri Match, I didn't understand a lot of what was happening. A lot of the mechanics were very, like, heavy, and you kind of needed to get a good understanding. But once you got in the flow of things, once you kind of knew the translations for the units you were using, it became a lot easier. And so I feel like it would have really thrived if it did get an English version or an app that people were able to play and just like translate on the go. But it kind of suffered from the devs not wanting to release a mobile app. The original like browser version just kind of didn't get as much traffic eventually. But during the time it was here, it was pretty enjoyable, honestly. I think the gacha was pretty good as well. It was kind of similar to how Dokkan works, where you just kind of pick up units inside a banner. The rates were more poor than Dokkan, but that's about how it goes. Gameplay was, I wouldn't call it boring. I would put it like right on the line of like good gacha mid gameplay. That's how I would put that, honestly. And yeah, I do think this is one of the better ones on the list, actually. It's really unfortunate that it went away, but it was competing with Dokkan and Legends at the time, which are very, very highbrow gacha games that people really pump a lot of effort into, so it's tough to compete. Here we have Mobius Final Fantasy. This was a more, oh dear. Please tell me it's saved. Please tell me it's saved. I accidentally pressed back on my, okay, cool, I did. I pressed back on my thing. But Mobius Final Fantasy was a more engaged combat style Final Fantasy game that was kind of played from behind the character, and it kind of reminded me of Legends, but a lot less engaging and more turn-based. The gacha was very poor. It really didn't have good rates, but it was like a reliable 5-year-long gacha game that a lot of people put a lot of effort into, and eventually it did come to Steam, I believe. Over time though, I don't think I put much time into it, just because it didn't really have any big wow factor that sold me on it. And I don't think it ever really got that. I think I definitely put it heavily on the side of bad gacha. I don't know how I would put the gameplay. Honestly, I guess I just never really got super into the gameplay, so I can't really speak on like end game versions of it. I can just speak on what I played of it, as well as like the random Sephiroths that I've tried out over the days, right? But honestly, this is one of the more like mid picks. It just never really got the ball rolling even for me. And finally, the last gacha game I wanted to cover for today, and the one that probably a lot of people wanted to hear me talk about, is Tokyo Ghoul ReInvoke and Rebirth. So this is a game that we played quite a bit on the channel over here, and honestly we have a lot of very, very fond memories alongside it. This game, if you don't know about it, we can chat about it a little bit. So this was a turn-based combo game where you would have a set of 6 characters and you'd be able to swap between the front row and back row, and just kind of play by tapping the characters and slowly building a combo. Every 5th hit would give you extra skill charge, so you'd want to always try and focus on that. And a lot of the time, you'd be dispatching sets of 19 sets of characters to go on missions to get you the missions to grind for each war. In every war, you would try and get to 30 million points to be able to get all rewards for it. Over time, they made it so that you could auto-dispatch, and you could pretty much finish any war pretty free-to-play friendly, just by hitting the go button, tapping it, come back in like 6 hours, hit the go button, do it again, and then you'd be able to get a pretty reliable like 20 stimulants, which is 1 free dupe on any character from every war. And so the gameplay loop was honestly one of the more refined ones in that regard. It was log on, dispatch, see if you get the quest you want to try and grind, grind that quest until you don't need it anymore, and then just finish off every war and get ready for whatever character you want to pull for next. Pretty good rotation, honestly. The only issue is that the gameplay ended up becoming very samey eventually, and so a lot of it was dispatch, hop out, every single war until the next like cool release happened on the gacha, which you could often work towards guaranteeing characters on the gacha at 900 gems, which was roughly about 10 wars worth of gems. In the end, I think that ReInvoke suffered a lot from not being able to have more options and more styles of gameplay. Like, personally, I talked about wanting like a tower game mode to be able to like climb up floors with harder and harder teams and try and make different builds for characters. That never happened. It just kind of became auto one quest 100 times, hop out for the day. And then pull on the new gacha character and hope that the next thing's gonna be exciting. And in the end, it turns out I probably enjoyed like Tokyo Ghoul as a whole for the game more than I enjoyed the game itself. And so while I do think the foundation was very good, I'm going to put it a little bit above fun gameplay. I'm going to put it all the way in the good gacha because you could guarantee characters, you could kind of work towards things, and you could always grind up stimulants to be able to max out the characters you already had. So as long as you had one copy of a unit, you could always get them maxed out to 100% and get their unique trait. Free to play, which was very nice. I also think that free to play sense that they had and the fact that you could grind up gems over 10 wars to get guaranteed characters and these dupes and everything made it so that I never spent money on the game. And if someone who's like a YouTuber on the game doesn't spend a shit ton of money, there's probably not a lot of other people that are wailing super hard for these units, right? And so I think in the end, a lot of these games boil down to eventually it tapered off and not enough people spent money on it. But there are a lot of things here that you can see are trends. If we look at Smash Rising, Diamond Records, Ori Collection, all of the things that they struggled with the most was the fact that they changed, and the change is what brought about the end of the game as well. But before they changed, they also wrote themselves into a corner with how they were trying to balance the game, right? So they had to change it in some kind of way. Black Clover just suffered from being too free-to-play friendly, which is the same thing that ReInvoke did. Smash Borders pretty much was in the same camp. Blazing tapered off slowly with the YouTube community, and so without that kind of support backing them, it kind of went away as well. And then other ones, you can just see that there's time that deteriorates all wounds, and eventually they get infected with different viruses and fade away into the background. But every one of these games, I would say, had someone that played them. And every one of these games has someone that enjoyed them back in the day. And someone that has fond memories of the things that happen inside them. Smash Borders and Rebirth are massive ones for me. And so when I look at this list, I see a bunch of games that were loved once and unfortunately have went away for one reason or another. And I think that we're probably going to see a lot more games go out the way that Blazing did. And we're probably going to have a lot of switching franchises, I think, over the next little bit. My guess right now is we're probably going to get another big jump collaboration game to replace the Ori collection. But we have the Demon Slayer Gacha coming out soon, which is going to be massive. It's like a 3D RPG style thing. Wait, no, it's like not an RPG. It's like a 3D like brawler 1v4, like Dead by Daylight, which is super interesting. I feel like Jujutsu Kaisen's probably going to get one at some point. We already have like a massive webtoon game in Hero Kantare, which I feel like might be on its way out, but webtoon is definitely going to be a huge contender, I think, for huge gacha games in the future. You could definitely like look back at this in like 5 years and see we have a Tower of God, God of High School, fucking Sweet Home game, and it'll just be crazy. But I do think a lot of these games had their moments, and every one of them has a reason why people love them as well. So I hope that in the future, I'll be able to do this again and look back at the happy times that we have with these games. Eventually all games will shut down like this. It's just a matter of what we can do to enjoy what they have while they're here. So for now, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys want to create your own version of this tier maker, I am going to put it down below in the description. So feel free to make your own version and send it to me. My criteria, naturally, is not definitive. It's kind of a terrible way of trying to organize it as well, because there's a lot of different aspects to every game that vary them up. But this is just kind of the best way I could represent it without just being like S tier, A tier, this made more sense to me. But yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. Take it easy. And I will definitely see you guys on the next video. Make sure to hit that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next one. See you later, everybody.